So it's been the perfect time for play. We've built snowmen and had snow ice cream. We've melted chocolate chips and swirled the chocolate sauce around in the snow and let it harden to make chocolate lace, which was always something my family did when I was young. Of course, when it's cold out, it's also nice to stay inside sometimes, especially after you've been out, and have a cup of hot cocoa, or a coffee, or a tea, and to wrap your fingers around that warm mug. So I'd like to invite you to make yourself a hot drink and listen as I read to you. Get cozy this winter. I'm going to read a story by Hans Christian Andersen. I'll read 2 if there's time. We'll see how it goes. And if you would prefer to just close your eyes and go to sleep, I hope that you will feel free to do so. The first story is called The Snowdrop. It was winter time. The air was cold and the wind was sharp. But under the snow where the flower bulb lay, it was warm and comfortable. One day rain fell. The drops sank through the snow into the earth. They touched the flower bulb and talked of the bright world above. Soon a warm sunbeam pierced the snow and earth and tickled the root. Oh, I feel like stretching, yawned the flower bulb. It's time to get up. Days passed, and in the ground the bulb shot out a greenish-white bud on a stalk with thick, narrow leaves. More sunbeams shone down to it. Welcome, they sang. You are the first flower. And the bud lifted itself up out of the snow into the brightness. The sunbeams kissed the bud, and it opened with joy into a little white flower. How beautiful you are, said the sunbeams, and the flower bent its head shyly. Spring is coming, and soon other flowers will bloom, so you will have many friends. But the wind howled and said, You have arrived too early. Winter still rules. You should have stayed quietly at home and not come out to show yourself off. Your time has not yet come. All the next week, the wind blew thick clouds across the sky, and there wasn't a single sunbeam. How cold it was, so cold that the little flower felt she might snap. Still, she stayed strong by thinking of the spring that the sunbeams had promised her would come. You silly thing, you'll break, whispered the snowflakes that came sweeping over her. Why did you let yourself be tempted out of the earth? But some little children spotted her and cried out in delighted voices, Oh, look at the first snowdrop, the beautiful snowdrop. It is the very first flower to appear. These words warmed the flower, and she was so joyful that she didn't even mind when a grown-up girl broke her off her stem, leaving just a little bit attached. The girl laid the flower in her hand and kissed her next story because I think we do have time, and I would love for you all to be able to relax and close your eyes now. The scenery isn't really going to change from this point on. There will only be 3 scenes, just peaceful scenes of snow falling. So there's nothing interesting to see. You can close your eyes and take some deep breaths. Inhale and exhale. Inhale and exhale. Inhale and slowly exhale. Our second story, also by Hans Christian Andersen, is The Snow Queen. Long ago, there was a very wicked sprite. For fun, he made a magic mirror. In it, anything that was good and beautiful had an evil, ugly reflection. The sprite ran about with the mirror, laughing at how horrible he could make people and places look. But suddenly, the mirror slipped out of his hands. It smashed into a billion pieces tinier than grains of sand. The wind blew them all over the world. A little boy called Kay was looking at a picture book with his friend from next door, Gerda, when suddenly he cried out, "Oh, I've got something in my eye." He blinked and winked, and the little girl checked his eye, but couldn't see anything. "I think it is out now," Kay said. But it wasn't. He had got one of the pieces from the magic mirror stuck in his eye. Little did Kay know anything beautiful now appeared ugly to him. Very quickly, Kay became bitter and cruel. He no longer wanted to play with Gerda and teased her nastily when she got upset. One day, thick snow began to fall. Gerda looked out of her window and saw Kay with the other boys from their street, carrying their sledges. They were off to play in the marketplace. There the boys took turns tying their sledges onto the back of horse-drawn carts so they would be pulled along and get a good ride. No one except Kay seemed to notice a large horse-drawn sleigh glide into the square. The sleigh was a gleaming white, and the driver was a woman all wrapped up in a white fur cloak and cap. Kay did not know it, but she was the wicked Snow Queen. "Come and warm up in my sleigh," she coaxed. Kay looked back at the other boys, but they were all busy playing. It was as if they couldn't see him or the fine sleigh and the beautiful lady. Turning away from them, Kay climbed in. The Snow Queen wrapped her fur cloak around him and kissed his forehead. And with that magic kiss, Kay quite forgot his home, his family, and his little friend Gerda. The Snow Queen cracked the whip, and they were off like the wind into the whirling snowflakes. The sleigh lifted, and Kay realized they were flying, not sliding. On they rushed through the icy air, all the way to the far north, and the Snow Queen's was quite blue with the cold. He didn't realize it at all, for he was under the Snow Queen's spell. He just sat there, making patterns in the snow with an icicle. "Kay," Gerda whispered, putting her arm around him gently. "Don't you remember me?" Still Kay sat, numb and motionless with cold. Then Gerda began to cry. Her warm tears fell on Kay and melted away the Snow Queen's icy kiss. Kay slowly began to remember his little friend and his family, and he burst into tears too. "Gerda, where have you been for so long, and where am I? Why is it so cold?" Kay wept so much that the splinter of mirror in his eye was washed out. "The Snow Queen took you prisoner," Gerda explained. "Now quick, we must escape before she comes back." Hand in hand, they ran out of the vast hall, jumped on the faithful reindeer's back, and were off over snowy mountains and meadows, all the way back to the gates of their town. As the reindeer trotted away, the children took each other's hand. They turned to look at each other and realized they were grown up. From that moment on, they only ever remembered the Snow Queen as though they had been dreaming. I hope that you are now dreaming the sweet